This is Kurt Doolittle for the Propertarian Institute, and today I wanted to cover the ongoing frustration that Christians have with the Propertarian program and try to explain why you're rightfully frustrated, but if you understand what I'm trying to accomplish, it'll be a little bit less frustrating, and hopefully you'll see what I'm trying to contribute to Christianity at the moment. Part of this has to do with how I work. I use a technique called falsification, which is the basis of all my work. It's falsificationary. And that means I attack a problem, every single presumption in a problem, until I get down to all that's left is what has to be true. And this process is really frustrating for anyone who's highly invested in it, because what I do is I seek out highly invested people and I attack their position until I get down to what is true, what's false, what's preferable, what's not preferable. And I try to understand what that underlying construct is. And then the second part of the process is I run King of the Hill games. And that's that now that I've got these ideas, I run a King of the Hill game and I state a proposition that's either supportive or antagonistic, and I encourage people to try to take me down. This tends to be the best way for men to learn. It's a very masculine way of teaching. So there's a limited number of people who like to learn in the masculine model and the competitive model, and they really enjoy it. And I find that those people provide the best education for me and understanding how others are going to interpret whatever it is I'm trying to argue. So I work by a falsificationary method. Once I find out some basic premises, then I come back around and I run a bunch of King of the Hill games, and I work on some problems 3 months, some for a year, and some for multiple years. Religion just happens to be the hardest problem of social science. It took me a long time. It's probably 4 to 5 years of work. I'm sort of done with it, which is why I'm making this audio, this podcast. I'm sort of done with it in the sense that my investigation into understanding is complete. Belief that I understand what to do is complete, but my understanding of how to talk to people about it isn't. So I'm still working on how to convey these ideas. That's what I'm still doing, and that's what you're still seeing. The problem with this method I'm using is that in order to preserve the quality of information I get from the audience, I don't tell you what my theory is or how I'm trying to construct it. And that's because I'm afraid you'll argue with that rather than the means of getting there. And so this frustrates a lot of people who haven't been with me a long time and followed my use of these 3 stages of the technique, which is understanding, testing, and then communicating, and developing the communication for it. And sometimes this stuff takes me forever. So what I thought I'd do today is give what the purpose of my investigation into Christianity and competing religions is. And if you understand that I'm starting with the premise that the 20th century is an age of pseudoscience, in other words, it's a second attempt at destroying Western civilization from within, and this time using Marxism, socialism, postmodernism, feminism, and just denial of reality, it's not very different from the Judaism to undermine, Christianity to make vulnerable, and Islam to conquer. This is just the same process, in my view, in history as it is today. The fact that Christianity was, in my understanding, developed in order to undermine the aristocratic civilizations and our use of reason, but that we slowly managed to successfully turn it from a hostile religion that sought to govern us and keep us in ignorance into a Germanic folk religion, which is really where I see Protestantism right now. The religion of Jesus is turned into what I call a folk religion rather than an institutional religion. In other words, it's practiced by people regardless of the institutions that try to control and manage it. My underlying goal is still to eradicate the ability to undermine our civilization by pseudoscientific, sophomoric, and then supernaturalism. So whether it's supernatural, scientific, or sophomoric, I want to eliminate the ability to make false promises to our people and to bait them into a hazard which is suicidal. And that's what happened in the ancient world, and that's what happened in this world. So I'm trying to solve that problem. If you see, here's my technique, and it's how I'm investigating Christianity. here's what the problem I'm trying to solve, which is the second attempt to destroy Western civilization through undermining, through the sale of false promise that baits us into moral hazard that causes class conflict. I'm trying to eliminate that. So that leads me up to my position. The first is, as I've just said, the suppression of falsehood and its consequences. So I'm going through my bullet list here. My work has this sort of single-minded objective, like I said, and it's ending lying in public speech. So I'm not really complaining just about Christianity, but the falsehoods by which the Abrahamic religions are constructed. The means of conveying those falsehoods, which I call Abrahamic deceit, the consequences of teaching Christians how to lie using the Abrahamic method, which is extremely frustrating. And it's one of the things that I think my followers have noticed the most, is that there's not any difference between how Christians argue and Marxist, feminist, postmodernists argue. It's using the same method. And this just proves my point, is that we're teaching, unfortunately, Christians are taught to lie about the contents of their religion rather than simply state the truth. Christianity is simply superior for these reasons. It's just science. Now, I'd just rather you said that and kept the faith in Jesus as what it is, or faith in God is what it is, or faith in the parables, whatever it is. That doesn't matter to me. What matters to me is that you understand that you don't need to defend Christianity by dishonest or intellectually dishonest argument. You can defend it scientifically because it's the best you can do. It's called the ultimate prisoner's dilemma problem. If you were to go research the ultimate prisoner's dilemma, you would find out that Christianity provides the answer to the ultimate prisoner's dilemma, which basically means that it's the optimum means of building trust in a society, and this is why Christian populations tend to get wealthier than other populations that practice other religions. I'm not complaining about Christianity, but the falsehoods by which the Abrahamic religions are constructed, the means of conveying those falsehoods, the consequences of teaching Christians how to lie using the Abrahamic method, which is what spreads the ability for us to be vulnerable to Marxism, socialism, postmodernism, Bozian, anthropology, all this pseudoscience that has come across us as a retaliation against Darwin. So because it makes the entire polity vulnerable. So I'm trying to eliminate that vulnerability of our people. I've already covered how Christianity, Judaism, and Islam were spread by this same terms. And so my objective is the opposite of Augustine and Aquinas. They wanted to integrate Greek reason into Christianity on supernatural terms in order to eliminate the conflict between the two of them. And I want to reverse it, which is integrate Christianity in Western science and reason on scientific terms. So how can I take the era of illiteracy that depended upon this mysticism and take the value of it and bring it into the era of literacy where we have so much scientific knowledge, and show that Christianity is not only compatible with science, it is scientifically optimum means of building a social order. The second point I want to talk about is the problem of a political religion. So Christianity, when expressed in secular scientific terms, like I said, is an optimum social order, and in other words, social ethic. It's a behavioral set of values that we train into each other. And it's an adequate personal religion. I'm not really fond of it. I think Stoicism and Epicureanism are far better, and this is why the church shut them down, as they honestly were. So the church shut down these schools because they were a competitor to it, and they wanted people to feel the ecstatic relationship that the poor wanted, and they wanted to outlaw the intellectual and spiritual relationship that the middle class wanted. So they shut down those schools. So I think that is the better method. The current psychology operates by the same method. It operates by cognitive behavioral therapy, and Stoicism is essentially cognitive behavioral therapy. It works, in other words, you're training the person to become adapted to reality rather than to escape from it. You're giving the people training or coping mechanisms. Stoics maintained some nonsense in their beliefs. The Epicureans didn't. It's a purely practical philosophy. And so my view is that we would be better off taught this. Do I use prayer all the time? Absolutely. Do I understand why that works? Absolutely. Do we need to probably teach people how to have discourses with heroes, demigods, and gods? It sure works. It's going to be very hard to say that talking with archetypes does not produce the cognitive and emotional results we want. It's more that I'm saying we should maintain Christianity as a social religion. We should give people the physical skills of producing mindfulness, and we should preserve the utility of conversation, what we call prayer, so that we can incorporate the knowledge of others who have lived before us and role play with those people. The reason is just pure science. When we role play with others, we pretend a conversation with them, we're replaying it, and it actually works. Same thing works as if you're talking about an archetype, like a character, a hero, a demigod, or a god. We benefit from this practice. But the problem is Christianity is an absolutely terrible political religion, which is why it sort of failed to achieve what Judaism did at local scale and Islam did at imperial scale. And it's why it's declined in the modern era so rapidly. My goal is to somewhat reverse that, which is to create and define political religion so that we can't be undermined by hostile religions again. And so I'm trying to find a way to put this together that doesn't affect just the faithful, but it affects the scientific, the rational, the moral means of thinking about the world as well. So where Christianity succeeded as a little bit as a personal religion, very much so as the optimum, as a social religion, and it failed as a political religion, I'm trying to find a way to use Christianity somehow to fit it into a political religion so that I can specifically license that political religion and specifically prohibit competing means that are less than optimum. To do that, I want to be able to restore a state religion and exclude others. So I'm trying to discover a way to make Christianity the or one of the state religions by converting it into secular terms. And this is possible because Christianity, and only Christianity among the Abrahamic religions, in fact of all religions, is compatible with natural law. But the underlying truth is that in Western Civ, both in pre-Christian and Christian eras, we practice natural law right back to our founding 5,000 years ago. But what we didn't do is, that Christianity says, is we didn't extend familial love to all members of the polity. And so what Christianity does is what made us be able to prepare our society for a middle-class majority by having us treat one another as potential customers. Then when we became potential customers, we were able to make use of it. And this is what led us to the prosperous condition we're in. So over the long term, I want to be able to produce the equivalent in our Western law that is sort of like that is inviolate, sort of like how Sharia is inviolate in the Muslim world. In other words, it's the set of law. It's the law of the society beyond which the government may not transgress. I want to produce that same thing in our civilization, which is no matter what the government wants to do, or anybody else for that matter, this is the rules beyond which one may not transgress. So it doesn't matter what politicians think or what philosophers think or anybody else that comes along. These are the basic rules of our society, and they're inviolable. In other words, they're prior to constitution and law. So the way I sort of look at the world is there's mathematics and science. On top of that, there's the natural law, which is what I'm talking about. And on top of that, there is the government. Well, the government can run within the limits of natural law, and that limits the government. The leftist prediction is that the world is purely political. There is no natural law, and whatever they can get by and enforce is whatever the law can be. And of course, this just leads to the tyranny and undermining of family and civilization that the left has been successful at bringing about. This whole individualism, hedonistic individualism, at the expense of family and civilization. And I also realize that it's so reductive and that these are non-personal means of faith, and I understand that, but it is what has to go into a constitution, because we can't legislate faith and belief. We can only legislate what can be said, what can be not said, what can be pursued and not pursued, and what can be acted and not acted. We can't really change what's in people's heads, so we have to put it in these terms. By doing that, I can prohibit things non-conformant with natural law and Christianity. This is how I can both license Christianity and its goods, license natural law and its goods, and prohibit hostile religions and systems of thought. Christians despise the fact that I can describe the lessons of Christianity in a small number of scientific terms, and that these scientific terms, if practiced, are the optimum strategies for social cooperation, at least on an interpersonal or social scale. Christians despise this because the magic, the spiritualism, the release, the what I call woo-woo, is lost by doing so. And because the whole point is to escape the burden of reason and to come back into touch with our feelings. Now, that feeling we have that we call spiritual is the same feeling we had in our pre-human history as members of a pack. If we have a feast, if we sit down together after the feast and relax, we feel very good. If we're running with a pack, we have this experience. So these are very ancient, very primal experiences that and frankly, reason, especially linguistic reason, is a relatively modern invention for us. So it's rational that we would want to satisfy all our needs, the spiritual and emotional, and ancient, the moral and interpersonal, and the rational. And there was obviously reasons we would divide the world into what we specialize in. So some of us would specialize in the spiritual and emotional, some would do in the intuitionistic and moral, and some of us would specialize in the rational. And because we're capable of all three of these faculties, so we can use all three of these faculties, and so we can, if we can use them, we can specialize them. We can work with whatever one works for us. It makes complete sense that this is something we want to demand, but again, I can only put in a constitution of truth that thing which can be reduced to law, and that's what I'm trying to accomplish. So it's not that we're saying these things don't matter. It's that faith is important for the faithful. The feeling of moral conformity or moral righteousness or moral safety or doing good is important to some, and the knowledge that we're doing good is important to others. So these feeling, intuition, and reason are things that we humans can do, and we do specialize them just like we specialize in physical activity, empathic activity, or reason and calculation. Next, restoring the balance of power. So we have now the law, now we have to talk about the institutions. So the institution itself of the church is, sure, I want to restore that balance of powers. If I can convert Christianity to secular terms, I can restore the church as the political agency or the political institution responsible for individual and family, thereby limiting the government to the material. And I can restore the competition between the family and the church. In other words, the family and church is an organization, government and commerce is an organization, and the military and state is an organization. And just as we have, division of houses today, presidency, these were meant to be class distributions. Presidency or monarchy for the upper class, the business class in the Senate, and the middle class in the House. Or in the United States, we did it differently. We did it by the presidency, the states, and then the people. But whatever, the idea is a division of labor, a division of responsibility, and this is something that's been us with since the Greek, before the Greek period, but it was certainly formalized in the Greek period. So I want to restore that balance of power, that competition that limits the ability of the state to use these political maneuverings to interfere with the rights of the people to conduct, to put the family above the individual in terms of norm and commons. So it's this division of competition I'm trying to restore. And yeah, I don't tell you these things because they taint the audience, and I can't let you know my purpose until I've sort of come around to it. So at this point, since I've come around to a solution, I can afford to explain it to you without interfering with it. And if I do it beforehand, I taint it. So in other words, I'm a scientist, I run tests, the public is willing to engage in these tests, and that's how I come out of it. But I'm sorry that it's frustrating to y'all that I have to play this antagonistic game in public, but it's through this antagonistic game that I find out not only what's true and false, but what's possible and impossible. So again, we're saying, how do I suppress falsehood? How do I make it a political religion? How do I restore it to the state religion? How do I restore the balance of powers? And then how do I make sure that whatever this return is serves multiple classes, multiple religions? Because I don't want to have us undermined anymore by coming in with new false underclass or upper class or middle class religions. I mean, fundamentally, libertarianism is just Marxism for the middle class. Marxism is just a monopoly for the underclass, and neoconservatism is just monopoly for the upper class. These are all monopoly systems of thought, whereas in Western history we've practiced tripartism, which is the goal is to find cooperation between the classes, just as we did between the aristocracy and the nobility and the middle class, which is the burghers, and finally labor. We had to find these means of cooperating between the classes, not pit them against each other. But the truth is we need each other. You're not going to get around without the upper class ruling. Nobody else can rule but them. It's not possible, despite what we'd like differently. The middle class governs best of all, but the interests of the vox populi have to be preserved by the family at least. So we have to find some way of communicating all these methods and these forms. And so I'm trying to figure out how to do that. Like the Chinese have Confucianism, the Tao, and Buddhism. They do nationalism and familialism very well. And every culture other than Judaism and Islam have these classes, although the truth is Judaism has exited everybody in their underclass. That's one of the reasons for their position. The Muslims have exited everybody except their lower classes, but they do have sort of these three tiers of Islam that are sort of not quite as much as not anywhere near as much as the Hindus do, but they do have classes to it. And in Western civilization, we speak in completely different languages. We use, religion, we use philosophy, we use law, and we use science, and we have these. At least those. There's literature in there, literature and history in there somewhere too. So we have these multiple classes speaking the same thing. But regardless of what message we talk, we're speaking in what language we're talking in, we have to maintain the uniformity of strategy across those classes so that we're always trying to cooperate with each other, despite the fact that we have different roles and responsibilities, comforts and fears in each position in that class, and we all speak in practically different theological, philosophical, rational, and moral languages. So how do we create that consistency across them while at the same time prohibiting others from coming in and undermining us? So that's what I'm trying to accomplish. I want to be able to state this in scientific terms so that no matter which language anybody talks about, we can reduce it to the basic science and then outlaw it if it's, prosecute it if people try to create undermining, because we realize that what they're trying to do is the way Western civilization has been attacked this time is through Marxist undermining, through feminist undermining, and through postmodern undermining. Marxism classes, feminism genders, and postmodernism identities. Then through science and non-science. So they're trying to divide us all the time, whereas our historical method of cooperating was always try to maintain competing institutions that served the mental framework of the different people who were in them. So we always had a churchy part or religion, we always had a state, we always had a commercial class, and we always tried to work together, saying that we're a people and working together. But the entire purpose of the Marxist feminist, postmodern, and denialist movement, denial being what you think of as political correctness, these movements have been set up to undermine our ability to cooperate together by pitting us against each other. So this is why I'm trying to solve this problem, despite maintaining our ability in the West to use different grammars, different languages, and different systems of thought that fill our particular needs because we've learned how to specialize in these, but keep the commonality between them, the optimum means of working together is the natural law with the Christian extension of exhaustive forgiveness until there's no possible chance left. In other words, live as Jesus would live. And there's a last problem to solve, the one that's less obvious. I think everything is easier than this one. And that is to solve the problem of the gender issue of religion. Through most of our history, Western civilization has been martial. In other words, wars have been fought by militias with a few specialized warriors. So we had specialized warriors and then militias of every man who would show up. we weren't ever able to afford what the Middle East was, or China was able to afford, which is massive standing armies, because in river valleys they can concentrate food production on small areas and get lots of turns out of it. Whereas in the West we have winters, and our food production is spread over large territories necessary for feeding horses, etc. So we never could produce the kind of funding of standing militaries that others could, and so we've had this militial structure. So while you had the church, you also had the military, and so you had this family church military polity thing going on. And you had the very masculine on the one side, and while this offends Christians, we view it as a very paternalistic or familial, but we view it as a femininely biased religion, which means that it's submissive. Whereas the military is a dominance-based structure, the faith is a submission-based structure. Not as much as Islam is. Islam is literally means submission. But in Western civilization, because we use the principle of sovereignty back into our ancient past, sovereignty means non-submission. I will never submit. I won't submit to anyone. We always operate under contract. So Christianity is caught in the middle of having been the religion of a people who were non-submissive but promoting submission, at least to the church and God, while sending them out to war in non-submissive form, in other words, in heroic form. So what's happened during modernity is the church has gone completely feminine, appealing to the outcast people, to feminine morality, to inclusion. It's not any longer a masculine, defensive religion that protects our civilization from competitors. So one of the things I want to do is restore masculinity to that religion. There are those of us for whom secular Christianity, its content of its cooperation is valuable, but if we want to protect ourselves, we have to equally show love and respect and debt to our ancestors, our culture, our nation, our civilization, and that these are more precious to us in the current age than the need to continue the expansion of Christian love to others. I mean, we already do it. As a matter of fact, the argument is we've now taken Christian love and spread it to the dysfunction. I'm not going to go into which communities we're talking about. But I mean, you all know about the toilets thing and whatever, and the marriage thing. Well, these are the consequence of the tolerance of Christianity making its way into secular world. Well, Christians are against it, but it doesn't matter. It's not strong enough to defend against it. Well, I want to bring in a masculinity back to it, and a lot of us do. I mean, this is not my idea. We want to bring masculinity back into it. Now, whether that's brought into Christianity or is brought into a restoration of what we call heathenry, which would be nature, worship of nature, ancestors, and pagan would be worship of heroes, demigods, and gods, or gods in the sense of pagans being archetypes. Whether we would try to set both of those systems up as in our law, in other words, as a masculine and feminine, or there be some attempt to unite them, which I think is impossible, or it seems to be impossible. Christians are certainly going to resist it. So, while the heathens wouldn't resist it, the Christians would. Now, do I also want to restore the martial functions of society? Yes, I do, because we can't train men to be men, and we can't create Western civilization until we keep training men to be men, manly. And so I want to restore the martial basis of our society. I mean, we don't think of it, but one of the goals of the post-war era was to crush Prussianism forever. But Prussia is where Western civilization originated, up there, and we obviously came in with a Yamna, but we built Western civilization up there near the Baltic, and Poland and that area are today, and Germany are today. That's where we were founded, and that's where our people originally became what we think of as aristocratic people. So they moved south and took over the south, the farmers over time, but this is where our people come from. And so by destroying the Prussia, what we did is Prussia was the final phase in restoring Western civilization to its original roots. So instead of finding that balance and then domesticating it, we came out of the Second World War with the French in particular dead set on destroying it. And that's one of the many reasons you'll see me saying France is the enemy of Europe and always has been, and France is still trying to create a feminine socialist totalitarian order, quite antithetical to our heroic Prussian or aristocratic order. So I'm trying to restore that. So my investigation right now, I'm sort of continuing my process into whether it's possible to unite these scientific, natural, and Christian traditions in a constitution somehow that prohibits the competition which would be used to undermine them, and whether they can be practiced together or separately. So again, I see myself as trying to unite Western civilization against further destruction, and doing so by the same means that the great men in history tried, whether they be Augustines or Smith and Hume. You don't think of them as doing this, but the Scottish Enlightenment, their objective was transformation of saying, well, the Smith's first book is on morality. Economics only came later when he said, well, the way you spread morality is to do it economically now, the same way we do it today. We don't spread our ideology of our Western civilization by religion as much as we spread it by economics. We're still doing it by force, but we're spreading it by imitation rather than force, and because economics creates moral cooperation. So I see myself doing what the ancients did and what the late medieval did or early modern did, and I see myself trying to continue that process of restoring Western civilization, but maintaining the good things that came from Christianity and defending us against the future undermining. So if you look at those 5 steps that I've sort of got: suppression of falsehood, creating a political religion, restoring a state religion to exclude others, restoring the balance of powers using the churches, and creating the same message across the multiple classes and discourses we use, because we have always practiced as this competitive multi-house system and multi-language system of thought, and then adding masculinity back into our religion. That's what I'm actually trying to do. So I know it sounds to y'all like I'm trying to be an atheist or something, and that's not the case. I'm just trying a way to solve a problem in the Western model of markets with a common markets and classes with a common unified ethic and morality in the service of one another, and I'm trying to prevent further invasion by these monopoly alien religions and alien cultures that seek to destroy us, and realize that I understand. I'm not one of these people that thinks Western civilization is not superior. There's no question in my mind that we produce the greatest innovation that does the most good to mankind in the shortest period of time of any other civilization, both in the Bronze Age, in the ancient world, and in the modern world. There's no question, no comparison. The closest people that came to us were the Chinese. Chinese had a particular set of problems that they couldn't get over, and those problems were ancient. The problems the Chinese couldn't get over were that they had established a rigid hierarchy too early. Confucius couldn't solve the problem of politics, so he addressed everyone to the family. So he created a hierarchical system, and at the point at which the Chinese were wealthy enough, prosperous, and technologically advanced enough to advance, they went out to the rest of the world, saw what we saw, which is there's not much good here, and went back home and fought against the invading hordes that wanted to come over the Chinese wall, just like we're facing the hordes that want to come over the wall right now. So the only reason Chinese didn't advance ahead of us or maintain their slight advantage over us by the 1400s, because they were ahead of us, and we went ahead, is that we went out of the world and said, we will take responsibility. In other words, we will embrace the change, we will see the opportunity, and it turns out the Chinese were probably right, and we were probably wrong. Now, we've got continents now, but we're facing the problem the Chinese do, which is we're a small number of people with vast vulnerabilities on our borders and vast vulnerabilities within, and we have vast vulnerabilities to our political system that they don't have. Why? Because our political system is weak. It's built for expansion. It's not built for defense. And so I'm trying to contribute to that era where we once again are organizing our society for the defense of what it brings to this world. Anyway, so that's my 45 minutes on hoping you will try to understand what I'm up to with when I talk about religion, Christianity in particular, and that it's not so much that I'm undermining your wish that Christianity could become the monopoly way the world works, instead of Christian ethics are consistent regardless of how we discuss them, whether by faith or morality or reason or science. That may seem the same to you, but in my view, I'm trying to defend our civilization, defend Christianity and restore masculinity in defense in the future. So I hope you could tolerate that. I did the best I can, and this is Kurt Doolittle for the Propertarian Institute. Thank you for coming along with me.